All right, welcome to another episode of the Tech Transfer Podcast. This one will be a great episode for our many scientists who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs or launching a business. I'm here with Jerry Hancock, who, with his wife Naomi, launched Sub-Zero Ice Cream. And Jerry, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Maybe talk about your business for anyone who's not familiar?
Yeah, my name is Jerry Hancock. I went to BYU and got a degree in chemistry. Um, and because I really wanted to learn about things, how things are built. But I really wanted to learn about business too. And I didn't get into the MBA school. So I started a business and just tried to learn from scratch.
And you had
Um,
gotten a degree, you had a degree in chemistry, right?
mhm, yeah.
And so how did that lead? How did you come up with the idea for Sub-Zero and how did you decide to go for that?
Well, I'm going to try and keep this short, but I believe everybody's got a different, unique experiences, and so in their life as they go through life, my background is I was an Air Force mechanic on F-16s. I did a little bit of industrial design, so product development when I was in at BYU. Got a chemistry degree and worked in software engineering, and then we bought a food franchise. So we had this food franchise and we weren't making money. We had extra space. So we went to the customer just to ask people what they wanted, and everybody said ice cream, but I couldn't afford any freezers.
Mhm.
So then it was like, well, how do we do this without freezers? And so I went back to the customer and said, what do you like about other people's product? And they said um, they like customization, and that's where the chemistry comes into play. Is that the product development was like the questions, asking the questions, and the chemistry came into play. Is that um, you you people want a customization, and my thought was the only way to make it more custom is change the flavor. The only way to change the flavor is start with states of matter, and which is a liquid state. Um, so there's so that's how it started. So it was really um, starting from the ground up, asking questions.
Well, that's great. And so did you think, and part of it is when you freeze the cream faster, there are fewer ice crystals, right? That's part of the selling point.
Yeah, that's the selling point. I didn't realize that at the beginning. It was all just about changing the flavor and increasing customization
Hmm.
and deleting the freezer out of the ice cream business. So
Hmm.
the what I've learned over time is that it increases customization, so not just in flavor, but also in texture. Um, but I also learned that most ice creams have air whip. I didn't have any idea about that before, and that we're no air whip, so it's a lot smoother texture. And if anybody's had grainy ice cream, you
Hmm.
know that that's just um, the um, so it's just a bad experience, that sawdust
Right.
texture in your mouth. And so
Hmm.
we wanted to so we learned that, well, actually, you know what, there was a guy that was selling um supplements that retard the water crystal structure,
Hmm.
and so he came into the store. He says, he says, your product is about as smooth as you can get it. And he kind of explained it to me. I was like, oh, that makes sense. And so then it was like, the smaller the water crystals. So in he says the only time he's had a better experience is being, you know, at a plant where they've got really high industrial, and it comes right off the line, and it's that fresh, and it's that smooth. But
Hmm.
um so it was that showed me. And then he kind of went into a little bit more detail, and he said your tongue can detect about 8 microns. So that's the sensitivity of your tongue, which is very small.
Hmm.
And he says your water crystals are getting below that.
Hmm.
And so that was something that was interesting.
Yeah, usually if I have ice cream and it's kind of grainy or it has crystals in it, I assume that's just low end, cheap ice cream, less good experience.
It is, but it's also pretty standard. I we
Yeah,
were to
yeah.
we were, and it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, okay, I'm going to give you an example. We do this for to kind of really showcase the water crystal structure. we've
Hmm.
started adding Italian ice, and that's kind of, as I mentioned, like it broadened our scope of what we could do. And I used to say, as the ice cream business moved from ice cream to low fat to um, yogurt, to
Hmm.
soft serve back to hard ice cream. I don't
Hmm.
really care, um, because we can move from each one of those shifts. And
Hmm.
so anyway, Italian ice. So as Italian ice started, becoming a thing, more of a thing, especially as some of the Italian ice companies would grow. We started adding Italian ice as a mix. Well, that's just sugar and water. That's all
Hmm.
that's all Italian ice is. But
Hmm.
when we make an Italian ice and serve it to you, it comes out so smooth. It's silky smooth, and it's versus like other Italian ice, it's kind of grainy
Hmm.
texture.
Hmm.
Better than shaved ice, um, but not like. And so people often think that there's cream in it, but there's not. It's just small water crystals.
Interesting. And so for anyone who hasn't been to Sub-Zero, the experience is you go there and you make your order. You have some pretty interesting flavors, like probably a greater variety than most places do. They put the liquid in the bowl and then they shoot liquid nitrogen on it and they freeze it right in front of you and then put it in your bowl or cone or whatever. So a really different experience from other places. And so you founded it in 2004 or so, I believe. And
Mhm.
then in about 2013, you were on Shark Tank. So you were well into the business. How many locations did you have at that point?
On the show, I think we said we had 18.
18.
So probably about 16 to 18, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Um, and so we're still, 2008 we started franchising, but it was just some people that came to us that said, "Hey, we want to open a shop." And
Hmm.
then we had a break, and then in 2010 we added a few more stores the same way.
Hmm.
Um, so it was pretty organic, the
Hmm.
way we grew, and
And
just
then
still is.
yeah, and your locations, your franchise locations, it looks like a lot of them are on the East Coast. Is that just where interest happens to be, or how did that happen?
That's just where interest happened to have been, and that's because
Okay.
of more of Shark Tank, and then some of the places like
Yeah.
where we started in 2000, I think it was 12, we 11, we added
Hmm.
a store in Sarasota, so it was a lot of like people going on vacation from the
Yeah.
East Coast, so they'd go up and down. Um, we we had a few more stores in Utah at one point in time, and that is where we had our original mass. We've got four now,
Hmm.
and we're trying to grow again. But
Hmm.
we had some. They resold, and that you'd hope that an ecosystem, a business ecosystem, a franchise system, would have some resale value, or you'd be able to
Right.
resell to exit. And as some of there was anyway, as with most businesses, there's some unscrupulous people that come along, and
Sure.
they went to jail and the store's closed. So it
Oh,
was
okay.
wasn't anything like it was. Well, I shouldn't say. There's a I've been trying to avoid saying it.
Okay.
There's a con in business,
Hmm.
that's not terribly uncommon, um, especially in restaurants, where somebody will come in and say, "I'll buy your restaurant. I'll do it on payments," and they take the first payment because it's a cash business, so they take all the cash that comes in for the next couple months and don't pay any of the bills.
Yeah.
And that happened. He did that with three of our stores, and so that um,
Well, that's the sort of challenge you don't expect, but there are going to be some difficult people to deal with. So,
yeah, it is going into business is difficult, and you need to be have your eyes open. But I also, it's a learning experience, and I like to go back as I learned about, as you go through those experiences, you're like, what is wrong with people? And then you read something like Elder Robbins has a speech. I don't know if you're familiar with "Making a Living, Making a Life"
oh,
that
oh,
he gave at BYU, and it actually
hmm.
reprinted it in the Ensign. And so I'd recommend reading it.
I'll
But
check
he
that out.
goes through and really outlines, um, ethics in business, and so your motivation. And oftentimes you hear, well, it's not personal, it's just business. And and I think it should be absolutely the opposite. It's always personal. And that's how your business should be personal. It's not just business.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah. And so you built up the business a bit. Actually, you had built it quite a bit, 16 to 18 locations. Then you went on Shark Tank,
Mhm.
and it's a great episode. And it seems like you and your wife did a great job. Lori seemed to really like the business, but she said you can do it without my money. So they passed and didn't make a deal. But what was the effect of Shark Tank? What did that do for the business?
Well, it gave us great exposure and it gave us credibility. And it's always nice to have five people to say, "Hey, great product." Even the
Mhm.
person that tastes like crap said he was joking, right?
I guess you
And
might like it.
yeah. So so the um, the difficulty with franchising is people don't realize how much upfront it takes. People look at it and go, "Well, it's so easy." Like to franchise a business. And I would say franchising is a very difficult type of business to be in because there's um and the reason I say that is because usually you have a business. So I have a plumbing business. Okay, I may be marketing
Hmm.
and for that business, but I have plumbers and I hire the plumbers and they commit this service.
Yeah.
But with franchising, you're selling a system. Without the system, there's nothing. And you're selling that to a customer that is a business owner that has to run the business, and then they service the customer. And so you've got two different markets that you're marketing. You're marketing the end
Yeah.
customer and you're marketing to the business owner. And so that's what makes it um, complex. And so it's anyway, I would like to say I'm learning how to organize.
Mhm.
But anyway, that's the
Well, and yeah, do you ship so for you, how does it work for your franchisees? Do you ship them product also, or is it the system and then they get their own materials?
there's certain things we collaborate on, like for instance, like flavors we all have made here in Utah and ship them out to the stores.
Okay.
So there's the cream is more perishable, so that's sourced locally.
Hmm.
And then um, and it's something you're going to have a Cisco bring in.
Hmm.
Cups, paper products, logo products, print products, we bring in and then sell to the franchisees. So it's a little
Okay.
bit of both. So anyway,
And what was the challenge like setting up the franchise? The first time you did it, I assume you have to look at everything you've done in your first location and reduce that to a process, right? How do you do that?
I would say the best example is the E-Myth. I mean, I think
Yeah.
all of your students like know what the E-Myth is, and it's it's so studying that, realizing that it's creating the system so that you can focus on the things you really want to do. And
Mhm.
but the so that's the first thing. So if you don't have that, you don't have anything. Second thing though is um the legal requirements, because it is a fairly regulated business.
Mhm.
So you need to have um, so you need to make sure that your legal documents are correct, and that's fairly expensive. Um,
And do you mean, Jerry, that franchising is heavily regulated or the food industry?
Franchising,
Okay.
food business isn't so regulated. I mean, there's now with but but franchising itself, especially in certain states. So there's 13 states that are registration states, and then the rest are not. But even that, then it's regulated by the FTC. So the Federal Trade Commission um, makes sure you're not selling something you can't perform about with so like
Mhm.
so recently there's and it's difficult to sell because the only thing you can sell, like typically, like if I'm selling a service, like say for instance painting or HVAC, I can usually quote it and say, well, this is it's going to cost this many hours and it's like this, whatever. And it's with franchising, I can only sell what's in the franchise disclosure document. If it's not in the franchise disclosure, this legal document is 200 pages, that's the only thing I can use to sell, because that's because otherwise it's considered a seller disclosure violation, and
Wow.
that brings up a liability. So if you're bringing up any materials, we had a selling partner early on. This is about the time we went on Shark Tank, and I
Mhm.
didn't realize they had this PDF and it had all these stats in there, and they weren't necessarily wrong, but they weren't in the FDD. So they were in the franchise disclosure document. Well, 3 years later, I get sued, and I'm like, for what? And I'm going, and they said, well, you had this document, it doesn't match. And in Minnesota, it's a registration state, and boy,
Wow.
it was painful.
So is that
Um,
a government lawsuit, like attorney general sort of thing, or is that a franchisee?
that it depends on the violation, and it really depends on whether the attorney general is willing to take it. In that case, it was just a franchisee, um, that but that took it, it made it available because of the law.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of the liabilities, legal liabilities, are not necessarily that um, you're that the regulator is going to come after you. It's that it allows a citizen to take action. So as a civil action. But recently, and if you go look for a brand called I Heart Mac and Cheese,
Yeah, sure.
you'll see that there's several states that have taken sanctions against that company because of seller disclosure violations. So it can be both. It's
Mhm.
In that case, they have to stop selling franchises in right now Indiana and California.
Well, I would think as a franchisee, like you're very beholden to the franchise company. So you wouldn't want to sue unless you were kind of willing to throw in the towel on the thing, would you?
Correct, correct. And
Yeah.
or if, let's say that you or you think that, well, okay, there is a case that, okay, if I sell a franchise and I sell it for $50,000 for an initial franchise fee.
Mhm.
Okay, so I get that $50,000. Now there's expenses to that, so I don't get all that money, and probably most of it actually goes to expenses. So it's so the point of the matter is, now I get them open. Well, this, if you have a seller disclosure violation, it's a lot worse than you might think, because it's considered fraud. Seller disclosure is considered fraud. It's like in that
Mhm.
classification. So
Right.
it's so if you, what that means is, like, if I sell a house to you and I don't disclose that there's rotting foundation,
Hmm.
that's a seller disclosure, right? So what's the remedy? Remedy is you have to give all your money back or anything you spent on it. So if you fixed up the house, now you have to, the buyer has to give you all the money that you gave them plus everything they spent. So it becomes, is that scenario. So there's a franchise, or there's 3 franchise systems right now that
Hmm.
um that I know of that are selling systems. Okay, so their system that they're selling is
Hmm.
actually patented by somebody else, and they don't have licenses to it.
Wow.
And so the sell the so let's say that one of the franchisees is just, he's not making as what he expected. Let's say he's not losing money, but he's not making what he expected.
Hmm.
Well, if he could get all the money back that he spent, why wouldn't you? Um, because
Yeah.
that's a seller disclosure. That right there is, when I'm, if I was, I have a patent on my process,
Right.
but there's a process that these 3 franchise ors are using, and they have about 25 stores each. And so they're about the same size as we are, but they're
Hmm.
selling a system that they don't own.
Wow.
And because somebody else has a patent on it. And
Well,
anyway, it's kind of interesting, but that's
yeah. Well,
unusual because there's most things don't have, it's hard to get most franchise systems don't have patents.
right. Yeah, that was one thing that was pretty interesting about you guys. So in tech transfer here at BYU, obviously, when we're doing a deal with an entrepreneur, usually we're giving them the initial idea.
Mhm.
We're selling them a patent
Right.
and they're building a business. You had your own idea, but you did, I think you filed the patent application back in 2005 or something like that. So pretty early on, you realized that could be important. How
Mhm.
helpful has that been having a patent?
Oh, I mean, it's great. The problem with it is it's really hard to enforce. Patents are
Yeah.
incredibly hard to enforce. Now, um, I'll give you one example, and I don't mean to
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to ramble on too much.
No, it's great.
It's one thing that's difficult is with patents. It's almost impossible to find an attorney that'll take your case on contingency. So
Right.
if you talk to like Tom Dixon, I think is his
Sure.
name.
The blind
That
tech. Yeah.
right. If you talk to him, he spent about 20 or $10 million on patent lawsuits.
Wow.
So spend a fortune. Dippin' Dot spent $10 million on a patent lawsuit against Mini Melts, and
Yeah.
so now Tom Dixon actually made money on it. He actually got
Mm-hmm.
a surplus. Dippin'
Mm-hmm.
Dots didn't. They ended up with a stalemate on the judge ruled that if Mini Melts added a mix in after it's frozen, it wasn't a violation.
Wow.
And so it was a crazy case. So there's a lot of pitfalls with patents. I do recommend having them if you can get it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's but the um okay, so we had some people that were violating our patent.
Mm-hmm.
I even have a guy that has a website, and he um advertises on his website that he will take money from people to teach them how to get around our patent, which he admitted to me that he's actually teaching what we do.
Wow.
So he's actually doing exactly what we do, and he knows it. But
Mm-hmm.
so I could sue him, but it cost me $100,000. Do I have $100,000? Is that, to do that and
Yeah.
divert away from the business?
Right.
So I got a contingency law firm. I got a law firm. And this is the tricky thing. Your lawyers
Mm-hmm.
should be competent. And I don't mean to, I don't want to complain about anybody too much, and I'm not going to mention
That's
any
okay.
names.
Yeah.
Well, we went through a lawsuit against somebody that was using our process, and
Mm-hmm.
we're 3 years into the lawsuit, and it turns out they filed in the wrong name, so the judge threw it out. He not only threw it out, he sanctioned the law firm. Now, luckily, he didn't sanction me.
Yeah.
Um, so um, there's a lot of pitfalls when it comes into patent. And there's another
Yeah.
story I probably want to, which comes to tech transfer, and this is where
Mm-hmm.
it's important to have the tech transfer entity like BYU have
Mm-hmm.
ethics when it comes to that. Like I talked about the making a living, making a life.
Yeah.
There's a there's a another nitrogen ice cream company, and these guys developed the machine while they were at University of or Iowa State.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they licensed it because they were at Iowa. Um, they started this franchise company, but they couldn't
Mm-hmm.
afford to pay the licenses and they eventually ended up closing the stores because they weren't paying
Mm-hmm.
the university. Now I don't know any of the details about that other than um, the that they weren't able to make it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's anyway, having that win-win. I know BYU
Yeah.
ended up um, having the rights to they developed us, I think, what was it, there was a pain medication,
Yeah. Celebrex, right?
Celebrex, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's a really interesting story because that
Mm-hmm.
the pharmaceutical company had the money, and then there was a conflict there, but it's
Yeah.
that's just unethical. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Well, and this is like to your point, you brought up several great things, and these are the sorts of things you learn running a business, right? That first, like a patent isn't self-enforcing. It's only valuable
no,
if you're willing to sue people. And
yeah,
then even if you do sue people, there's no guarantee that your attorney is going to do things the right way. if you get a judgment, so I used to be a practicing attorney, and as a client, you think we're going to get the judgment and then they're just going to hand over the money. No, that's not
Mhm.
true. Like usually
No.
you have to go through some collection
Yeah.
activity afterwards. And that costs money. So it's just things, everything is more complex than it seems, right?
Well, I've got a company, this small lady, she's got a food truck down in Florida,
Mhm.
and
Uh-huh.
she's using my name. I've got a trademark on that name. I've had it for 15 years,
Yeah,
and she's using my name. She's, well, yeah, come sue me. And I'm like,
right.
uh, you know, it's like, it's
Yeah,
my name.
yeah. So trading off your goodwill. And so it really is, how do you decide? So uh, one thing I wanted to ask you was how you ensure quality in your various locations. They're spread all over the country. But a related question is, how do you decide how aggressively you have to enforce the trademark? Because really, you're trying to protect the consumers there a little bit, trying to protect the business. But how do you draw those lines?
Well, we've had three other people that have tried to use the name Sub-Zero ice cream, or some variation of it.
Hmm.
Luckily, in most cases, in fact, I had an interesting thing about um, the first one. The first guy came in, I hadn't filed my trademark yet, and he came into my store and I'd been working on the patent and forgot about the trademark. He walked
Hmm.
in the store and he says, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use your product in Florida and your name." He says, "I filed for your name." And it was like, I was like, "What?" I was
Yeah,
like, and so luckily I knew, I knew a little bit about trademarks, and I knew that there was an intent to use and actually using,
yeah,
and he just filed for an intent to use. And he came to me about 6 months later and said, I decided not to do that. He says, "Why don't you pay me for the trademark?" And I said, "Well, give me a couple months. Okay. So if you know
yeah.
anything about that intent to use, you got 6 months or you lose it."
Oh,
I was
okay.
like, "Well, give me a couple months." So I let him expire.
Yeah,
And then I
that's great.
got my trademark. Now, in another case that's more recent, there's two other cases where people filed for the trademark because I sent them a notice. So they filed for a
Mhm.
trademark, and I just let the trademark office go through their process, and they denied it.
Mhm.
So therefore, they let the trademark office do the judgment for me. Um,
Okay.
Now, it didn't mean that what it meant is that they were more likely to concede when I saw that they had been
Mhm.
denied, to just
Mhm.
give in. So
Got it.
there's certain things you can do that aren't as costly by letting the trademark office do some of the adjudication. What I'm planning on doing is what this lady is saying, "Why don't you apply for a trademark? And if you get the trademark, then, which she's not going to get it,
Mhm.
then I'll
Mhm.
back off. And
Mhm.
then I'll let the trademark office do the adjudication for me."
Mhm.
Um, Now the quality, you're talking about quality.
Yeah.
How do you, it really comes back to systems, making a system that's easy to follow. And
Yeah.
so, when in our stores, we have piping, so the employees never have to deal with the nitrogen. All they have to deal with is a pedal. It's a count,
Yeah.
so there's a certain count, like 1, 2, 3, 4. We're done. There's
Mhm.
a motion. So all of those things are just, we've got the flavors down to where each flavor is calibrated for a certain amount. So every flavor is 1/10 of an ounce for what we use. So that's one reason we make those flavors here and ship them out, because now
Mhm.
they're standardized, and they're all at 1/10 ounce pumps. The thing
Mhm.
interesting thing about is flavor is a chemical reaction on your tongue. So if you use so if I were to take an ice cream mix and I heated it up to a hot chocolate flavor,
Uh-huh.
it'll be too rich,
Okay.
because the hotter it is, the more those molecules vibrate and cause interaction with the tongue, and it'll be too sweet. The colder it is, the more sweetness and flavor carrier you need. So depending on the temperature, you'll flavor something different or thin it out differently.
Mhm.
Um, so that's anyway, calibrating those flavors again for the temperature and for the taste, and the portion.
Super interesting. Yeah, and so for the business, and it is like you say, the if someone hasn't seen it, the liquid nitrogen is set up so yeah, they push a pedal and it goes into the container. It's a very like orderly, like you say,
Mhm.
a slick system. The for the business, and so you're largely focused
And
on.
people have
Yeah.
asked years ago. I used to get a lot of people say, "Why don't you automate it?" I
Okay.
go, and I've kind of can come to the conclusion because I don't want to automate it. I want the
Hmm.
personal interaction. Number one,
Hmm.
it's really difficult to automate or nitrogen because it's really difficult to measure because as it's dispensing, it's
Uh,
evaporating. So I
hmm.
can't weigh it because it's
Hmm.
evaporating as it's going into the bowl. Um, but the other point is that um, it's an experience. So we our competitors out there in the liquid nitrogen ice cream space, they all make them do it with a mixer, and then
Hmm.
they walk away from the customer while it's doing its thing.
Yeah.
It's like, well, the whole point of this is I see you and you're a person, and I'm dealing with you and I'm talking to you, and this is an interaction.
Hmm.
And that's our business model. So if I were to change that, it's changing the business model.
Right.
If I were to put you don't go to McDonald's and have a conversation with the guy that you ordered a hamburger from. That's why they can put a kiosk in.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but here it does play out just like you're saying. It is this interaction like that. It's kind of little entertainment value to the experience, right?
Right.
So so you're running the franchise business largely. What's the next big thing? Like what is the best thing that could happen for Sub-Zero right now?
Well, like I said earlier, it's franchising a very front end based business. It takes a lot of upfront, the systems, but also um, as the hardest thing for us is that as sales fluctuate through a season, a store can cut back its employees and its cost of goods, where the franchise office can't. So we have
Oh
higher
yeah.
costs year round. That's
Hmm.
probably the most difficult thing. So what you need to do is you need to franchise business goes through different cycles, and getting to a certain scale of 100 stores is typically the goal. And the reason you do that is because then you don't need to sell another franchise, and that keeps that level that cost level. But the so for us, the other thing I'm going to say as far as a business aspect is that there's different parts of the business that as an early stage, you end up wearing all the hats. So in our stage, we're still small and we're wearing too many hats as far as our staff. So we're wearing
Hmm.
marketing, we're making sales, we're doing operations. It's too many hats. So getting
Hmm.
to the point where you can separate those hats,
Hmm.
um, and and in where you really scale, there's a book called Traction that's by a guy by the name of Gino Wickman.
Okay.
And I think that's my goal right now is get to the point where we can hire in that state. You usually in typical business, you oftentimes you see an executive, a CEO, and he's just the general and everybody follows that. And but I think that's what's more powerful is something like a Roy Disney and Walt Disney, where you've got a visionary, and this is the Gino Wickman model, a visionary and an integrator. And the integrator is the executor. He makes everything orderly, but the innovator, which is typically somebody that you're going to have in your group,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
innovator is not a great at organizing, and
Yeah.
driving. So he's
Yeah.
really good at innovating and having all these and figuring things out. And then this guy takes it and just runs it, but he's not great at inventing.
Hmm.
So having that complementary. So my next phase is to get an integrator,
Got it.
um, so that I can get back to inventing.
Yeah. Well, and you've innovated up to 25 locations, I think. So that's a.
Well, and we've got one of the things that we've learned is really the different aspects of the business. So, for instance, like when we started, we looked at selling out of the store, and that was just one part of the product. And that what I've learned is that's just one part of the business. But if you're not using the other parts of the business that have really branched out because of the process,
Mhm.
When I say that, I mean, there's cakes, there's catering. Catering
Mhm.
should be, uh, an entire business unit of its own, because we don't have to freeze it. So if you think about most events in the summertime, they usually don't have
Mhm.
ice cream, especially if they're large events, because they can't keep it frozen.
Yeah.
And so we can keep it frozen. We do 1,000 people and not have to worry,
Mm.
because we make a half gallon every 30 seconds. So I can, so in that, then I've actually came up with just this last 6 months or so, a new process that makes that ice cream, every 30 seconds I can make a half gallon. So
Wow.
I can scale that now, and that's the next thing, is doing more of a mobile and an event type business.
That's such a good idea. Yeah, because when you see those events, usually it's shaved ice because
Hmm.
that they can manage, but ice cream they can't. So,
Right, exactly. But it's just a higher experience. And then, again, it comes to, like, most catering today is drop off. And I really
mm,
think that that's not catering. The old style catering was service. You brought in,
yeah.
you catered, you brought people, you served people. And that's
Mm.
one thing I think is different between us. When we come out and cater, we're there at attention. I have a military background, so
Mhm.
you're there at attention to serve them. And people often can say, well, when are you going to leave? And I said, when you
Mhm.
release me.
Yeah.
So it's a very different mentality than dropping it off and I'll come pick up my dishes later.
Yeah. Mm. That's great. Well, good. Well, hey, Jerry, this has been super interesting. We have, so on campus, we often have grad students who are scientists. They've been doing something in the hard sciences, but they're interested in business. Just as a final question, what's your best advice for someone like that, scientist who wants to be an entrepreneur? Where do they start?
Find out what makes you unique. Um, because what makes you unique, all those experiences that make you unique, um, is what will, okay, why did, I'm going to make one example of why I think Sub-Zero came about when I did it. It's because, had nitrogen ice cream been done before? Yes. It had been done in academics. They do it in the chemistry department. I hadn't seen it there, but the point of the matter is it had been done. When I went to talk to the chemistry department, they said, well, it's not a very good product. You're not going to, it's not, you can't sell it. So I was like, solving that problem. What's different? No. So what their process was to take a half gallon of ice cream mix, put it in a bowl, and take 1 cup of of liquid nitrogen at a time and stir. When you do that, they're trying to drop chemists are thinking, they have one way of thinking. They're thinking precision. They're thinking, I'm going to drop the temperature really slowly until exactly the right amount, and then I'm going to stop. Okay, and that's what they're trying to do. A little bit, stir, stir. Well, nitrogen is very hyperactive. So you stir like that, it goes out to the edge and it sticks to the bowl. So it becomes a really hard crust, almost to where you need a chisel to get it off. And then it's still liquidy in the center. So what we figured out is, now again, because I'd had mechanical experience, I had chemistry experience, I'd had food experience.
Mhm.
Now I'm thinking about, and so what I figured out is if I take all of the nitrogen and put it in at once instead of a little
Mhm.
bit at a time, it covers the entire surface area and makes a sheet. So it freezes a sheet in the middle of these two phases. That's what we patented, was the fact that we can break those sheets and have it collect and plow on top, and then it creates a process. So it's really what makes you unique. Is so food guy hadn't been dealing with science, and the science guy hadn't been dealing with food. So it's that combination
Wow.
of
Well, that's
what
great.
makes you unique.
Okay, fantastic. Well, great advice, Jerry. And thanks. Great to see BYU alums out doing interesting things, launching great businesses, and really enjoy Sub-Zero. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.